Hey everybody, welcome back to our weekly podcast. My name is Patrick Tan, the General Counsel for ChainArgos. With me as usual, our CEO and Chief Data Scientist, Jonathan Reiter. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all the, comments, likes, subscribes.
For both likes.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Helps the algorithm, helps us get this content out to everybody else. So what are we going to talk about this week? Obviously, a lot of stuff has happened in the past week, so there's quite a bit of stuff that we have to cover. We have to talk about this strategic U.S. Strategic Crypto Reserve, and that meeting is, I think, either in progress or close to. It's going to be starting soon.
No, they're finished.
Right? Oh, sorry, they're finished. Yeah.
There's no way there's an after party because the president doesn't drink.
That's right. Yeah. So at the time that this is being recorded,
that's
it's
probably not true.
Already complete. We're going to talk about the Bybit Hack. We've got some interesting insight into all of these criticisms about THORChain that are being hurled at it. So we're
going to trace a transaction straight through THORChain to show you that it's not a mixer.
Yeah, I don't think that's what they held themselves out to be anyway, so whatever. And then finally, EIP 7702, which is Ethereum improvement proposal, and it has to do with the way transactions are executed through the stuff like DeFi and stuff like that. So we'll get into the nuts and bolts on that.
This is coming up in the next fork that's in a couple weeks.
Correct, yeah. And I'm assuming this is going to pass.
No,
it's already been approved, right? Yeah, okay, so there you go. So, and what it actually means in terms of saying that, you know what I mean? So, okay, so let's go back straight to the U.S. Strategic Crypto Reserve. So I think I got to address the elephant in the room, which is that the announcement by the White House says that Bitcoin was never hacked. Is that correct?
Well, okay, all right. So there were two sort of announcements here, one at the beginning of the week and one very recently. So the first one was this sequence of Truth Social posts, the first of which said that there would be some crypto, so I think they called it stockpile, not reserve in those messages. And the first thing it did was it mentioned, what was it, Cardano, Solana, and Ripple.
Yeah. And then immediately...
Well, 2 hours later, it clarified that, of course, Bitcoin and Ethereum will form the core of the stockpile. So
the heart of the reserve.
Something like that, yeah. They're careful with your... Yeah.
But that's what they said.
Was that a phrasing? Okay,
yeah, the heart of the reserve.
Maybe that's what I said. Fine. And so there's information we can glean from that. And then subsequently, we learned fairly recently that the plan here is not to spend... is no net expenditure to acquire assets. So they'll be building this from assets that the government already has in some form, net of returning seized property to the people the seized property is supposed to be given to. We talked about that before. And then that they have been directed to find revenue-neutral ways of acquiring more assets. It's not clear how that would work because acquiring assets in a revenue-neutral way, I mean, I guess you could swap one thing for another. I have an idea about how they can do this, which will be coming up shortly, where I think they actually do have a way to get stuff without a problem, and it's revenue neutral. So I guess we can tackle these things in sequence. First, what does it mean that the first message mentioned 3 somewhat controversial tokens? So nobody, if there's going to be any kind of reserve stockpile thing, everybody agrees there's going to be Bitcoin in there. And I think everybody who, independent of if you think this thing should exist, you agree that there will be Bitcoin in it, at least, if there's anything. And I suspect if you asked people to name the second one,
ETH,
99% people would say the other one will be ETH. Okay,
which fine. That seems
I don't think that'd be 100%. Yeah. There'd be some guy that names some token you've never heard of that they think is the greatest thing ever, but a little bit of that. Below ETH, or next down the list, if you asked for number 3 and 4, you're going to get a lot of answers. Mm-hmm. One thing we just learned that tied at number 3 is those 3 tokens, and that's obviously the outcome of a political lobbying discussion process. Whatever, that's the way the U.S. government works. It's fine. What there is to learn here is that those people won and the other guys lost. So I don't know that anybody's... I don't know anybody said the list is capped at 3.
Yeah.
2, 5... 15. I mean, there's probably 6 or 7, 8 candidates that are known to be quite active in lobbying and politically and have a significant American nexus.
Yeah.
You're unlikely to get anywhere if you're entirely based in some other country.
Correct.
That's how
that was the impression I got as well. Yeah. Like that if you had a project and or founders who were primarily American, I think you had a good shot at it. And of course you have to be lobbying as well. You can't just have that and then not be lobbying. You got to be lobbying as well.
The government historically owns the local phone company, not a random foreign phone company.
Well, depends on which
the phone
country
company
that
may
is.
buy parts of other, but they're going to invest in the local whatever.
No, it makes sense.
Fine.
Yeah, which is fine.
So that's interesting, and it has implications for a lot of things because those three now have some risk that the program is defined in a way that does or doesn't give them a fair amount of money. So that's quite risky. And the other candidate stuff out there, we're not going to name them because we'll miss or we'll not have enough, whatever, but you can guess who the next 4 or 5 whatever candidates are. They now have some possibility of getting included, I suppose, but more likely that's just not going to happen because you're not going to go back and add people to the club. That's not usually the way these things go. It'll be much later and there'd be a whole group and they'd then be in the third tier. So we've learned something about that process, which is interesting. It also tells you that there was clearly some fighting in various directions, whatever. Notably, many of the Ethereum L2s don't really have tokens to contribute like that, so I don't know how they would fit in there under ETH, so maybe you'll get like a future announcement, because there's a bunch of American projects related to that, whatever. So that's interesting. And then, the statements about the revenue neutral nature. So I do think that maybe some of this hasn't been considered very carefully. The government does actually have the responsibility for stewarding this pile is handed to the Secretary of the Treasury, and in some cases jointly Treasury and Commerce. These are just executive orders. It's not incredibly clearly written out, but it's written out. The Treasury Secretary already has discretion over a pile of money called the Exchange Stabilization Fund that I think if the government wants to spend money on this stuff, it can spend money on this stuff. I do think, parenthetically, it'll be funny to watch a food fight among the people who advocated for these tokens to get access to that money. So this is a thing that dates back to the Roosevelt administration. So this is almost 100 years ago.
Teddy or
no,
Franklin?
Not Teddy, Franklin. It's gold standard related, whatever, stabilizing exchange rates, the Great Depression, and the various things. At this point, I think it's about $200 billion because it's very old and has accrued interest for a long time. So this thing was in retirement for a long time until Bill Clinton brought it out to lend money to Mexico to stave off a collapse of the Mexican economy in 1995.
It's funny, isn't it, right now? Because, we paid for Mexico.
Well, yeah, Mexico, I guess they can build a wall and to pay the interest on the loans. Actually, it was supposed to be short-term financing. It was. Mexico
paid for it.
I guess I'll say sorted itself out. Whatever. That resolved itself. But it was very controversial that this pile of money, and the argument was, well, this impacts the exchange rate because it impacts the stability of an economy, and fine. Subsequently, because once you take the thing out from the 30s to the 90s and you use it again, it was used to guarantee money market funds in 2008, and it's provided a variety of sort of short-term swing financing type activities. So if it's okay for Treasury Secretary, was it Paulson, to use this to guarantee money market funds, to provide money market fund guarantee facilities, that's got less to do with exchange rates than buying random crypto assets. And it's not a budget item. So that's a pile of money the people they've already given control to could use to go buy this stuff. And I think it'll be funny to watch those conversations. I will also note that as soon as a bunch of people here see that there's a pile of money that the president can just spend without, they're going to be so I'm not saying I think this is going to get spent on crypto assets. I'm saying they have this pile of money and the people with that control can spend it. And if they think this will help stabilize the U.S. dollar, they can make an argument and go make some purchases.
Also, you don't have to make
all kinds of stuff.
You don't have to make too strong an argument because this is not something that requires congressional approval.
Yeah, I'm not even sure they can override it. Much.
Yeah, I'm not.
Dating back to the Roosevelt, whatever, the Treasury managed the country's foreign exchange reserves. Some of this even predates the Federal Reserve System doing a lot of these things because the internationalization of that.
It's strange though that they didn't think of this first.
I mean, I actually don't know who in the Clinton era came up with using this thing, but yeah, I think mostly because I just want to watch the food fight over what to do with the money. It'd be pretty funny.
Who would bring this to the president's attention? I would assume it's the Attorney General. I mean, who would be in a position to look at this stuff?
I don't know if any of the people advising on any of this stuff know how any of these parts of the government work. If you say it was used in the Clinton administration, they may just write it off immediately. It was used in the George W. Bush or Obama, so maybe that's not going to help either. It was used. I don't know if any of the previous Trump era COVID stuff used this or not. It might have actually. So I don't know the dates on those various programs because the support programs came from all over the place. So anyway, that's interesting that they have coincidentally delegated control to the same guy that controls that pile of cash, and
Yeah, they could totally use it for that. First of all, they have to figure out that it's available for use. That's the one thing
it's not too hard to figure out.
I know, but right now we haven't seen that at all. So
We'll see what happens. They're looking for money.
all right. Do you want to talk about the hack?
Okay, we'll talk a little bit about the Bybit hack.
Well, not the Bybit hack, the Bitcoin.
Also, yeah, I would like to note that in one of the crypto working group, the statements that were issued by the White House, they said that Bitcoin is the oldest cryptocurrency and it's never been hacked, which that's of course false. Bitcoin was hacked in 2010, setting the precedent that social governance, rolling back the chain is the thing to do. There was a problem with an integer overflow, and it generated a tremendous number of coins, and that was reversed. It was decided that it would just be reversed by the community, and they effectively rolled back the chain. They just forked it earlier than that and went on. So, not only has it been hacked, it set the precedent related to stuff we're about to talk about, where actually immutable decentralized is not important. So you can say it was a bug. Integer underflow is not a new problem. This existed before computers were made out of silicon. There are documented issues of this in artillery calculations on vacuum tube computers. So there you go. So maybe, I'm not saying I expect a correction, but an acknowledgement that the idea that immutable has never really been a thing. I will also note that that hack was funded by Bitcoin out of a faucet that never moved later, and it was almost certainly done for what I'm going to call entertainment purposes. So let's keep... Okay, so now we'll get to the Bybit hack, the actual hack. Yes?
Yes.
So we talked a little bit about the Bybit hack last week. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to say there's been lots of discussion about Bybit and hacking and where the money went and all this kind of stuff. So this... Oh, again, we didn't set the display correctly. How do I do this? There we go. So this is inflows to the THORChain bridge on the Ethereum network. This is deposits of ETH onto that network. You don't really need to be a brilliant data scientist to ask yourself what happened here, and the answer, of course, is the Bybit hack. So without doing any tracing, we can guess that this is attributable to the Bybit hack. In fact, it is. Fine. Yes, the sum of the deposits exceeds the total amount of the Bybit hack. There's some recirculation, a lot going on here. And in fact, this is only going back a year. If we run it back further, this is a massive explosion, and it's pretty obvious that there's something going on here. So Bybit is one of many protocols that has experienced a huge increase in business and fees as a result.
You mean THORChain?
Sorry, THORChain is one of I think maybe Bybit's got more fees too now. An increase in volume and fees as a result of this hack, as a result of the Bybit hack. So I guess talk briefly about what happened, because we now know more about what happened, and then we're going to trace some money through THORChain. So one of the things that's happened here, not hack-wise, but in the community, is that people have noticed that it's relatively easy to outrun the tracing because, of course, as we discussed before,
it is.
The hacker gets to set off the starting gun, so they have a head
like
start.
General Aladdin.
Like General Aladdin, as we said last time, and they can outrun them, and then you end up begging people publicly to preemptively freeze things, and if nobody's licensed, or even if they're licensed but they don't have a legal order, depending on their situation, they may not do so, and then once that sort of compounds for a little while, the money's escaped. So there you go. Mixers have been used, non-mixers, bridges, whatever. THORChain's gotten a lot of use. I think THORChain's gotten a lot of stick that it didn't deserve for... THORChain's got a lot of problems, right? THORChain's got custody issues, central control issues. THORChain's got a lot of problems. But as we're about to see, at least some functions in THORChain, let's just do this, then we'll come back and talk about it. So this is just a randomly selected swap on THORChain. It doesn't really matter. There is a explorer called RuneScan that's got lots of whatever stuff. To be fair, OsgardX has been doing a fair amount of North Korean money laundering business too. Oh, OsgardX is whatever. It doesn't matter. So here's just a random swap we picked. And this is to show people how, for some of these transactions, tracing is trivial. Other transactions, you have to do a little more work to figure out what's going on, but this is not a mixer. Come back to that in a second. So this transaction this is a couple days ago, I think, was a swap of BNB on the Binance Smart Chain, BNB Smart Chain, for ETH on Ethereum. And if you just look at the swap transaction, so this is using a UI built by the THORChain guys at RuneScan that decodes the transaction structure. It's not complicated. You can just pull the stuff from the RPC endpoint yourself and decode it's not super complicated stuff. We're doing this in a simple manual way to show that you can even do it with Control F, not at scale. You can do it at scale. Simple scripts, not a big deal. So block height, whatever. So this has got two addresses that look like they might be the relevant addresses with amounts of BNB and ETH. So if you were really naive and you had a system that had indexed all the transactions, you could just find all the ETH for this size and all the BNB for this size. That's kind of cheating, right? So we're not going to, that's kind of cheating. We're just going to show how these things are linked together. So you can just take this address and you can go, this is the BNB side address. So they give you, RuneScan has sort of these shadow addresses for the chains that you can trade on. So you can see activities out of whatever that address was here. And you can also just go look at the address on the regular old Chain Explorer. Again, this is the simple manual version. Oh, gee, there's the exact same amount that's matching. Okay, so, we've found a relevant outflow, right? It's whichever one it is. We found a relevant outflow. Okay, you can find the inflow. If you scroll down a bit further, this here has got the deposit from this address, right? So we've found the transaction. This is the money being sent in to a thing that is, I think, identified as a THORChain deposit. Fine. Similarly, you take the thing over to Ethereum and you look and you scroll around, you look, whatever, and yeah, here you go. The exact same amount matching from the THORChain router out to that address, right? Job done. So this is not terribly complicated, right? You can figure this stuff out. You can see this specifies the address here, originating. We did this basically with Control F. Clearly, I found these in advance, so we could click quickly. It doesn't take 2 hours, even manually. I did use the system to make it quicker, but it's not hard. If you can trace these kinds of things, there's other transactions other than swaps and whatever you got to go through. Listing again, whatever, the Asgard decks and the rest of this stuff. None of those is more complicated. The same way you can trace through Uniswap. Yes, you have to go trace it, but, crappy record keeping is not a mixer. The whole point of a mixer is that zero knowledge, no information is leaked.
Yeah.
Right. A bad mixer that leaks a tiny amount of information that requires a lot of cryptanalysis, analysis, that's the sort of cryptography version of things, maybe counts as a mixer or not, or a bad mixer. I don't know. Like if there's logs somewhere, Samurai Wallet or Bitcoin Fog, are these bad mixers or are these, actual zero knowledge mixers are, this is just disorganized record keeping, which if you have a license may or may not be a regulatory problem if your records don't conform to the required records format. But, they're on a computer. You can disentangle them. You can't disentangle the Tornado Cash records. Right? If Tornado Cash is used correctly, so you're depositing significantly less than the liquidity in the pool, you're waiting long enough, whatever, you cannot de-anonymize it. This thing, used correctly, used incorrectly, whatever, it's just mechanical work to de-anonymize, right? That's the whole point. All this stuff relies on what are known in computer science, cryptography, as one-way functions, meaning it's easy to calculate one way and basically impossible to calculate the other way. If it's easy to calculate one way, it takes me 3 hours and I have to write 2 computer programs that I can then repurpose and use again and again and again. That's not the hard thing. That's the easy thing, right? Easy doesn't mean you can do it on a desktop calculator. So, yeah, there you go. Now, related, we got the list of fixes out of the Gnosis Safe folks about what they corrected to fix these problems. I'm not going to put the thing up, but they fixed an awful lot of bugs that, if you look at them, really seem like things that should have been removed long ago, right? There are 2 different fixes listed for protecting against man-in-the-middle attacks, which are a classic form of attack that's been understood as these systems are extremely vulnerable and were not well hardened or, really anything like that. So it's not surprising that any of this got, exploited. It's not particularly well designed or hardened. mean, we've noted many times where we'll look at a project and we'll read the audit reports, and they even include obvious glaring security gaps, and the response is noted.
We'll fix it in post.
The decentralization protects against this, or the game theory of the protocol protects us. And like, oh, okay. In this case, it's a slightly different situation. The design itself is kind of weird, and it would be more secure to have people perform these operations independently, and they just don't. So the design
I think
installs a single point of
a
failure.
little bit of explanation about how Gnosis Safe works might be helpful.
We did
as
this
well.
last week, didn't we?
Did we? I don't recall.
We did this last week.
Oh, yeah,
so
yeah, you're
this
right.
is not an on-chain thing.
Yeah.
The signatures are
Yeah.
glued together
and
off-chain.
then,
And that introduces a single point of failure,
Correct.
which means when you've got long lists of bug fixes related to security on
That is a
systems,
long list of bug fixes, though.
and this
I am a bit
system's
concerned.
like 8 years old. So, show the full raw transaction data on the UI. If you have to add that to your system, mate, all software has bugs in it, right? We're not saying that, but so yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. Everybody has a dependence on that system, and
All right.
it's not a great scene.
EIP
That connects very well.
77002.
Okay, all
Tell
right.
us what
So
it's about.
This is an interesting one here. So what's happening here is that this is in the upcoming Pectra hard fork, which is a combination of two different sets of features. I believe that this is not formally settled as going in, but is supposed to be going in. It's discussed as going in. So they are adding a number of basic smart wallet type features. There was a previous EIP about smart wallets that was a candidate. I forget what it was. The number we talked about before, and I said something like, "This is a terrible mistake and will be brutally exploited."
Yep.
It was not released.
It was not
I was
released,
quoted to that effect, I think, in several news organizations
That is
never
correct.
contacted me. They took it off the podcast. So this one is different in that it does improve the security, or at least it improves the user experience, whatever. And it makes an important change that overlaps with something we've talked about many times. It changes the way token control delegation works. And by doing so, it admits that the previous arrangement handed off control in a way that people have denied. So we'll break that down. All right. So I'm just going to read exactly what it says in the EIP here. The ERC20 approve then transfer pattern, which currently requires two separate transactions, could be concluded in a single transaction with this proposal. So what is the ERC20 approve then transfer pattern? So this is a standard thing used by most wallets, DEXs, lots of services, where you are asked to delegate control over your wallet to some smart contract, and that is processed by the network. You sign that, and it is processed by the network. And then later, under that delegation, you go to the contract and say, please do X. All right. And X is generally take the money from my wallet, from my address, from my location, and do the thing I want you to swap it, trade it, transfer it, whatever. And there's a gap between those two because the way the system works is you have to have the delegation processed, and then you have to have the balance transfer occur. Merging these two things into a single operation introduces trouble that is discussed in the EIP, that is also exploitable, but we'll save that for a later podcast. They are aware that it might be exploitable. They don't seem to understand how exploitable it is, but whatever. The basic issue there is that balance checking is now much, much more complicated because since you don't have a requirement of lining everything up at once at the beginning of the block, lots of initial balances can be invalidated. And so you can end up with a negative balance later on after results have occurred, and certain things get reverted, certain don't, and that's very exploitable. A little bit more complicated. Anyway, so by merging these together, I can submit batch, delegation, and execution. So that actually makes the whole thing more atomic. Now, why does this matter? This matters because for that gap, you've handed control to another contract, and it can do up to the amount you've authorized, whatever it wants with your assets. And if that contract is upgradable, mutable, controllable, has an admin key, you've now entered into a joint custody agreement with the owner of that contract. Yes?
Yes.
I mean, very explicitly, because you've signed a delegation of control. Literally, it's a power of attorney. I mean, it literally, it's a power of attorney.
It is a power of attorney. It's an effective power of attorney.
It's not a piece of paper. It's a digital power of attorney. You're letting them do that with your assets.
Yeah.
You're handing them over.
Well, you don't. It doesn't. Not all power of attorneys have to have like a written. Yeah, it doesn't have to be written.
It's certainly similar to.
Yeah.
Depending on the jurisdiction, we can have a conversation about exactly how similar they are. It's almost identical to some U.S. state understandings of how that works. In fact, it might even qualify in some states.
It's like the
as a
valet, I
literal
guess.
broker.
When you hand the keys to the valet.
Well, you can't. The insurance won't pay out. Anyway, so this matters because many of those contracts do have admin keys and are controlled by people. We've written about this with respect to a number of protocols. The extent to which those organizations support this change is an admission that this removes their control. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, there you go. If it had worked like this many years ago, things would be different. But it didn't work this way, so things are the way they are. So that's interesting. This does resolve some problems going forward. It does introduce somewhat more complex and difficult to understand security problems. I will note that because the no negative balance transaction ordering problem is NP complete, it is very easy to game this in a way that will cause confusion because screening is computationally infeasible. That was phrased in a way that should make sense to very few people, but those who get it will understand what I'm trying to say. Yeah, so it's interesting. It's interesting. This is partway there. It does have advantages, smoother in that sense, I suppose. Yes, I find it entertaining that after having claimed that maybe some of those things weren't quite accurate, it's been admitted. So there you go. Smart wallets. Interesting. There are a lot of, and even the document further down here, there's some discussions about how difficult this is. So yeah, there we go. The following is a non-exhaustive list of checks, pitfalls, and conditions that delegate contracts should be aware of. This makes the attack surface for services much, much larger because there are a lot more things that you can do to gain control over somebody's balances than before. If you can get a hook in there to get temporary control via the mechanisms that have been introduced to allow this sort of merged functionality, you can take the funds out and do whatever you want with them far more easily than before. Before, because of the structure, I explicitly delegated control to you or a contract that you have the keys for.
Yeah.
And if you're snooping the chain, you can go in there and do your stuff in the interim, right? Now, so that's hard. And I have the attack surface includes you, but no other parties. Yeah. It's a lot more complicated now because if I can cause certain transactions to fail that you didn't expect to fail, but third party, whatever, other impact of that transactions will continue through or generate something I want on a DEX or whatever, that could be helpful to me. For example, right, if transactions occur that move the price dramatically on a DEX and I'm able to get a separate on the same block transaction through that clears on that other price, but your transactions revert, mine still might go. Something like that. Something is sort of a simple example of an attack that's now very available. So it's challenging. A lot of the anti-MEV stuff and whatnot won't work anymore, and it opens up the MEV space pretty dramatically, which is interesting. You could even submit your own transactions that you expected to fail in ways that the screening wouldn't catch, which I've got to say, for the record, is similar to, but not identical to, the way the Pereira Bueno brothers tricked those things into retrieving money, and shouldn't be that difficult to work out.
It's an interesting observation that, obviously, we've talked about this before. This is not new in that sense that, there is somebody in between that kind of essentially takes custody, power of attorney, if you like, and does that. And so that clearly has some potential legal issues, and so you try to remove that by acknowledging that was an issue to begin with, but then now you've actually created an entirely new, like John was saying, large attack surface that could lead to even more problems.
Yeah, even this EIP makes it very clear that they are aware when they started working on this that this introduced a lot of difficult to check problems, which it does.
And I don't know necessarily that compromise is. It's an interesting choice is all I would say, because you make the legal things, you pay a fine, you move on, hopefully, something along those lines. You do this, and as you mentioned, it's not inconceivable that many people would probably have the capabilities. I'm pretty sure they're building it even as we, getting on with it even as we speak, because a lot of the protections that prevented this sort of thing won't be effective anymore.
Yeah. You could fix the legal problem by just removing the admin keys from the delegated contract, but no one seems to want to do that for reasons that don't make any sense to me.
And then this is more likely to blow up in a big way, and then would highlight, which is why I think it's interesting, because this blows up, and then people start to look at why did you change it to this system?
Yeah, I mean, by this, like this smart wallets have a huge attack surface. Smart wallets are going to be very exploitable. The equivalent of MEV on smart wallets is just taking all your money, which is, I mean, no,
I know. It's
the difference
just so
between
brazen.
hacking the exchange and hacking the custodian, right?
Yeah.
The custodian is not taking 10 basis points off your transactions. The custodian has all of the assets. This is moving the attack from one place to the other. I mean, that relates back earlier even to the THORChain and Bybit Hack proceeds discussion. There are plenty of services. Look, there's been public complaining by people on Twitter about, well, Base has North Korean ETH assets on it now.
Indeed.
Why is nobody asking you to freeze that? A legitimate question. Right. We're not equalizing the way Coinbase and Base operate with the way THORChain operates, but they can still both be doing this the same. And if it's the same, it's either okay in both cases or wrong in both cases. I mean, neither one of those things is a licensed regulated entity. One of them is related to, but not.
Yeah, Base itself is not.
Yeah.
I think that's important.
The other one isn't the licensed entity, but these are not operating within those perimeters at all. So, are they legally required to or not? I mean, one of them is definitely American. One of them is got the founders are what? It's an American guy, an Australian guy, and it's unclear what country it's operating in. I don't actually know what Australia's sanctions posture is on a lot of these things. So maybe it's not even a problem. And the American one definitely is a problem. The North Korea sanctions in the United States are an issue. The other one may arguably, because I doubt that Australia has the same kind of secondary sanctions thing that the United States does. So Australian citizens, presumably in offshore jurisdictions, can trade with North Korea.
I just think,
subject to local law, but
I just think it's interesting because you've decided to swap. You've decided to swap what was essentially a legal problem to create now what's a technology problem, I guess. Your own self-manufactured security compromises for which all the original protections no longer exist. And then now, because this thing is going to blow up because somebody's going to exploit this thing for sure.
I mean, I expect that you're going to see smart wallets that come up that end up having custody to provide ever more complicated features anyway. So I'm not sure any problem's really been solved here.
And then ultimately,
if you can't completely iron it out, every attempt to half-ass iron it out will make it worse.
And when it does blow up,
lesson for life.
If people take a closer look, the first thing they're going to ask is, why did we trade off this system for this system? Oh, that's why we made that trade-off.
Yeah, that's in the same way you're seeing the Bybit Hack response from a lot of people is showing a recognition of problems.
And then what will end up happening is you'll get both. You'll get the problems from the hacks and the legal issues that you tried to paper over.
That's normally what happens when you don't actually fix the problem. You just convince yourself you fixed the problem by ignoring the real problem.
Just remember, it's not a lie if you believe it. So on that optimistic...
We get Jason Alexander as a guest on this podcast. Right?
On that optimistic note, thanks for tuning in. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Thanks for all your likes, comments, subscribes. Helps us, helps the algorithm, helps us get that content out there. We'll see you again next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.